Now, I know this is a very foreign and strange concept to a Canadian mind, but people are literally opening up their homes.
Allowed to come to Canada, but welcome by the streets.
Canada is a wonderful country. I've grown up here for 22 years and I've seen so many people move here and build successful lives for themselves. In the international media, you see that Canada is a wonderful place to live, it's a growing economy, it's very wealthy, and lots of people make a big success of it. There are, however, some complications that make moving to Canada and starting a life for yourself here a little bit more difficult than it initially appears. And as a Canadian, I want to help represent the process honestly. And so that's why today I'm going to give you my top 4 reasons not to move to Canada. Problem number 1 is that we're very selective with who comes to the country and who doesn't. I won't go into the complexities of the immigration system at this point, but safe to say that the government of Canada has certain things that it wants, such as a high net worth, lots of work experience, a university degree, and particular skills the government thinks the country is missing at this particular time, and for each one of those things that you have, it will assign you a certain number of points. And if you cross a specific threshold set every year based on our immigration targets, you may be offered an invitation to apply for a permanent residence. Even though the process is relatively straightforward and very efficient, it is recommended that you have a lawyer. This video is certainly not immigration advice, and if you have very specific questions, please contact a lawyer. Being that the government is so selective, it takes people that are normally considered very employable in their home countries, and that leads me into problem number 2. The Canadian job market is extremely tough, even for people who grow up in the country. The truth is, it is hard to get work in Canada. You have to send out hundreds of resumes over the course of months, and you're only going to get a couple of interviews. Most of the time, they won't even send you a rejection. It's going to be radio silence until you get something. This is particularly a problem for newcomers to Canada, since you very likely spent thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours building up your education, personal portfolio, and work experience that back home makes you extremely qualified to work in your particular field. Unfortunately, however, in Canada, immigrants are often told they need a Canadian education, they need Canadian experience, Canada-specific things that really don't make any sense and don't make you any more qualified to work in Canada, but just serve as an arbitrary barrier to entry. This often forces newcomers to spend months and years working low skill, low wage, and frankly low dignity jobs in the personal service, customer service, delivery, and transportation industries. That is not something you signed up for whatsoever when you chose to immigrate to Canada. And those low skill jobs bring me nicely into problem number 3. The cost of living is entirely unaffordable relative to what even average people are making. If you just start with housing, there are only a few places in the entire country it actually makes sense to start off living as a new immigrant. Those would be Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal if you speak really good French, Edmonton, Calgary, and the greater Vancouver area. Now, unfortunately, the average cost of houses across all of those different places is about $817,000, or 12 times what the average person makes across the entire country after taxes. It's even worse for people who need to rent their places, because just to house a family, you need to rent a unit that'll be about $3,500 to $4,500 a month just to get a couple of bedrooms in a major metropolitan area where you can actually find some work. Then there's stuff like the cost of food and transportation, which has seen massive inflation just in recent years, starting from a place that was already very expensive. And things like insurance, gas, and other expenses that are high mandatory fixed costs make it very, very challenging to live in Canada as a newcomer, especially if you're single. And that's all before you consider what is a very substantial burden of taxation. Canada pays among the highest income taxes in the world. Not the highest, but unfortunately, even compared to some of those higher tax countries, we get less for what we pay. Places like Scandinavia, parts of Europe, do pay higher taxes, but they also get sponsored university, free or low-cost, high-quality public transit, and other things that compensate for a higher cost of living. In Canada, you have to pay for everything yourself from transportation to school to insurance, and in many cases your extended healthcare, and what you do get from the government in exchange for paying your very high taxes does not compensate for the cost of living. The only thing that compensates for a high cost of living is just making more money. And in most countries you can do that by networking your way to a better job. But that leads me into problem number 4, making friends is really hard. Unfortunately, Canadians do not have the habit, like most of the rest of the world, of going out and socializing with strangers. We don't have big public occasions where you can go and meet people socially, except for things like trade shows and conferences where you can network and meet people in a professional environment. It's very transactional and it's very, I want this, what are you going to give me? And just making some friends and growing a social network is relatively challenging to do. Now, there are places where you can do it. If you wind up going to university, that's a great place to meet new friends. Otherwise, churches, temples, and community cultural centers are your best option for getting started. But to build a network from scratch to the point where you can use it to get better employment or ask for favors or even just meeting people for dinner, it can take months to years to develop, and that time is very isolating. Canada, unfortunately, has one of the highest rates of depression, not only in the English-speaking world, but across the board, and it really shows in the frayed social connections that so much of the country deals with, and this can be very jarring, especially for people coming from India and Latin America, as well as other parts of the global south, where social networks are intricate, well-developed, and exceptionally maintained. So for this video, where does that actually leave us? Who should be moving to Canada? Well, it's kind of a hard question to answer because there's so many inherent contradictions between the jobs that actually need to get filled versus the people we actually are trying to bring here as part of our immigration regime, that it doesn't leave a whole lot of practical room left. The answer seems to be something on the order of wealthy, successful, entrepreneurial people that have done a really good job back in their home countries of setting themselves up and are willing to go abroad and start their lives completely from scratch. This works great for people who are refugees, for example, fleeing starvation and abject poverty, or people who are facing horrible oppression, where the through line is they just want to go, they just want to get out, and the first thing they want at the top of their minds is a safe and stable place to live. You can figure out the rest later. Those people are really successful in Canada. They do very well, and they make up some of the bulk of our immigration success stories here in Canada right now. Otherwise, you're looking at entrepreneurs who are willing to start their lives over from scratch, or people who have a large and stable income back home and are just looking for a change of pace, but who do not need to rely on the employment market in order to sustain themselves. Canada really is an awesome country. I love it. I love living here. I love being Canadian. And I love that so many people from around the world want to come to Canada. And I love that other Canadians love that as well. But we do have to acknowledge some of the inherent problems in the system with the way we do things and with the way it's all presented in the media and on the world stage. If you're thinking about moving to Canada right now, I absolutely encourage you to contact a lawyer, check it out, do your due diligence, but really think about how starting from scratch in a place where it's really hard to get a job will impact you, your family, and your economic situation. And that's really it. Thank you so much for making it to the end of this video. If you liked what you saw here today, please comment, like, and subscribe for more finance content and more content about Canada and the way we do things here in this country. I'm James Davies, and I look forward to seeing you in the next YDFM video.